What if that nagging feeling in the back of your neck was real? What if those hands reaching out from the dark that you believed were there were there? What if the monster in the basement really existed? And what if there was really something under the bed? Would you have the courage to face your fears?
Hello, brave souls. I'm your host, Paul Rondeau, and today I've got something a little different. Again, I really enjoy this AI stuff. I like the way you can make stories out of it, and some of these are kind of cool, so I'm doing some different variations of Stephen King themed stories. So the first one, I just had to write a horror story as Stephen King, and it goes like this. It was a dark and stormy night in the small town of Derry, Maine. The rain was pelting down relentlessly, tapping against the window panes like bony fingers. In the distance, thunder rumbled ominously, as if warning the town of the terror that was about to unfold. In the heart of the town, there was an old, abandoned house that had been empty for years. The locals whispered about its eerie presence and how strange things always seemed to happen around it. But no one had ever dared to venture inside. Until tonight. A group of teenagers, led by the brash and fearless Tommy, had decided to explore the house. They crept up the creaking stairs, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. As they entered the first room, a musty odor filled their nostrils, and cobwebs clung to the ceiling like ancient curtains. But it wasn't the smell of the cobwebs that made them scream. It was the eyes that stared back at them from the darkness. The eyes belonged to a strange and twisted creature with long, bony limbs and a gaping mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth. The creature lunged at them, its claws tearing through the air like knives. Tommy tried to fight back, but his friends were frozen with terror, unable to move. The creature's eyes glinted with a malevolent intelligence, and it seemed to be enjoying the fear it was causing. As the creature closed in on them, the teenagers realized with a sinking feeling that they were trapped. There was no escape from the nightmare they had stumbled into. The rain continued to pound against the window, but it was drowned out by the sound of their screams. The creature had claimed its latest victims, and the town of Derry would never be the same again. Years later, the house still stands empty, a silent reminder of the horror that took place within its walls. The townspeople avoid it, knowing that something evil still lurks there, waiting for its next prey. And in the darkest corners of their mind, they can still hear the sound of the creature's laughter, echoing through the night like a taunt. They know they will never be truly safe, for the horror that stalks them is as real as the storm that rages outside. For many years after the incident at the abandoned house, strange things continued to happen in Derry. People would go missing, and their bodies were sometimes found mutilated in ways that defied explanation. Rumors began to circulate that the creature was still out there, still stalking the town and waiting for its next victim. Some said that it had always been there, lurking in the shadows and feeding on the fear and suffering of those around it. The people of Derry lived in constant fear, never knowing when or where the creature would strike next. Some even started to believe that it was an ancient evil, a demon that had been unleashed upon their town as punishment for some unspeakable sin. But despite their fears, the people of Derry refused to leave. They clung to their homes and their way of life, even as the darkness closed in around them. And in the end, it was not the creature that destroyed the town of Derry, but the darkness within their own hearts. The fear and suspicion that had always lurked just beneath the surface finally boiled over, tearing the town apart from within. But even as Derry fell into chaos and madness, the creature still watched from the shadows, waiting for the day when it would be strong enough to emerge and claim its final victory. And in the silence of the abandoned house, its laughter echoed on, a cruel and mocking reminder of the horror that had once been unleashed upon the town of Derry. That definitely sounds like a variation, or like if you were just to scour the internet for Stephen King, the first thing that must have came up was It. And it just pretty much did an It story. But instead of the town kind of being like an extension of Pennywise or It, basically the town was just like haunted by that. It's pretty cool. And like the Losers Club ended up getting just straight up murdered right off the rip at the beginning of the story. So that one's interesting. The next thing I wanted to do was I wanted to write a creepypasta in the style of Stephen King. Because in all fairness, Stephen King is hands down my favorite writer. I've read a ton of his books. It's the reason why I got into horror in the first place, realistically, I think. And it's the reason why I'm still so invested today. So my next prompt was write a creepypasta in the style of Stephen King. And you're going to notice a lot of these start kind of the same way. It was a dark and stormy night when I first heard the legend of the Faceless Man. The air was thick with the scent of rot and decay, and the only sound was the distant howl of the wind. But as I sat huddled in my bed, trying to ignore the terror that clawed at my heart, I knew that something was out there, waiting for me. The Faceless Man, they called him. A creature born of shadow and madness, with skin as black as night and eyes that glowed like hot coals. No one knew where he came from, or what he wanted, but everyone knew to fear him. I tried to dismiss it, just as another ghost story, told to scare children into behaving. But the more I heard, the more I realized that this was no mere myth. The Faceless Man was real, and he was coming for me. I started to see him everywhere, out of the corner of my eye. A glimpse of darkness, a movement in the shadows, and then he started to appear in my dreams. A faceless figure with arms that stretched impossibly long, reaching out to pull me into the darkness. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, that I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew the truth. The Faceless Man was real, and he was coming for me. I started to avoid dark corners of my house, the places where he seemed to lurk, but no matter where I went, I could feel his presence, like a cold hand on the back of my neck. And then one night, he appeared to me in person. I woke up to find him standing at the foot of my bed, his faceless head cocked to one side as if studying me. I tried to scream, but no sound would come out. He reached out with one long arm, and I felt his icy fingers brush against my cheek, and then he was gone, leaving behind only the stench of decay and the memory of his touch. I knew then that I was doomed. The Faceless Man had marked me as his own, and there was no escaping him. He would follow me to the ends of the earth, to the very gates of hell itself. And so I sat here, alone in the darkness, waiting for him to come for me. The Faceless Man is out there, waiting in the shadows. And I know that he will find me soon. And when he does, I will be his, forever. I'll be honest, I really like that one. It starts out kind of goofy like the other one with the dark and stormy night. I'll be honest, that first line it makes me think of the 90s. Every single freaking little kid movie back in the day had some kid in a cool attic bedroom and some weird thing happen at night during like a rainstorm. Or maybe that's just how I remember it. The next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to write a zombie story in the style of Stephen King. Ooh, it didn't start with it was a dark and stormy night, so that's a positive. All right, so the story's finally done, and here it goes. The town of Haven had always been a quiet place, tucked away in the middle of nowhere. But that all changed when the dead started to rise. At first, people thought it was some kind of virus, something that would pass in time. But it soon became clear that this was no ordinary disease. The dead were coming back to life, and they were hungry for flesh. The town was overrun within days. The streets were filled with the walking dead, their eyes dull and lifeless as they stumbled through the ruined buildings, searching for their next meal. For those who were still alive, there was only one option: to run. But there was nowhere to go. The roads were blocked, the phones were dead, and the outside world seemed to have forgotten about them. In the end, there were only a handful of survivors left. They barricaded themselves inside an old factory, hoping to ride out the apocalypse until help arrived. But as the days turned into weeks, they realized that they were on their own. There was no rescue coming, No cure for the disease that had turned their friends and family into mindless monsters. They were living in a nightmare, trapped in a world that had been turned upside down. But they refused to give up. They banded together, working to fortify their defenses and scavenge for supplies. And then one day, a stranger appeared at their door. He was a grizzled old man, with scars on his face and a gun in his hand. He said his name was Roland, and that he had been through this before. He had seen the dead rise before, he said, in another world that was just as dark and hopeless as this one. But he had fought his way through, and he had survived. Under Roland's leadership, they began to fight back. They raided the town for weapons and ammunition, and they set traps for the walking dead. They fought tooth and nail every day to stay alive. It was a hard life, a life of constant danger and uncertainty, but they were alive, and that was all that mattered. And in the end, they knew they had each other. They were a family, bound together by the horror that had brought them together. And as long as they had each other, they knew that they could survive anything that this world could throw at them. That is super interesting because Roland is actually the gunslinger character from his Dark Tower series. And the idea that Roland would come from a different place, like a different dimension, actually makes a shitload of sense because he does. Like, it's the whole kind of idea of the Dark Tower in the first place is that it's like the multiple worlds of his shared... He's got like the Stephen King extended universe. And so this story actually makes a lot of sense, which is pretty cool. In terms of a zombie story, it's a little lackluster. I don't know. The human factor is usually what makes a zombie story interesting. You know, it's most zombie stories are just like a character study of how someone would deal with a terrible situation. And so you gotta nail your zombies, but you really gotta nail your characters. And I get that this is a very short story. It'd be hard to put something together like that, but it's pretty cool. I liked it. You know what? We're gonna keep going with this one. As the weeks turned into months, the survivors in Haven grew stronger and more organized. They built a community within the walls of the factory, pooling their skills and resources to make a life for themselves in this new world. Roland became their leader, his years of experience helping them to stay one step ahead of the walking dead. He taught them how to fight, how to survive, and how to live in a world where death was always just around the corner. But even with Roland's guidance, they knew they couldn't hold out forever. The dead were growing in number, and their hunger for flesh seemed to grow more insatiable with each passing day. And then one day, they heard a voice on the radio. It was a faint signal, barely audible, but it was enough to give them hope. The voice belonged to a group of survivors who had made their way across the country and who were now heading towards Haven. It took weeks of hard work and planning, but eventually, they were able to clear a path through the dead and make their way to the outside world. They met the other survivors in a small town, where they exchanged stories and shared what little resources they had. Together, they formed a new community, one that was stronger and more resilient than any one of them could have had their own. They built a new life for themselves, one that was filled with hope and a promise of a better future. But even as they worked to build a new world, they never forgot the horrors of the past. The walking dead were always there, lurking just beyond the horizon, a constant reminder of the fragility of their new existence. They had learned to survive in a world that had turned upside down, a world where the dead walked and the living struggled to hold on. And even as they moved forward, they knew they would always carry the scars of their past with them. Yeah, the only issue I have with some of these stories is they're very like surface level. They don't really go into detail. You know, it's like very, very broad strokes. And for whatever reason, it doesn't like to end these things on like a sad ending. Well, actually, I take that back. The first one was pretty not happy ending, where the kids died and the town fell apart. And yeah, I guess I'm wrong on that one. But yeah, I like the promise that, or not the promise, but the potential of these. It's cool that you can write a story in the style of somebody else. I don't know if this is really in the style of Stephen King. If anything, it just kind of pulls ideas from Stephen King, and maybe it kind of writes like him, but I like the idea of these AI-generated stories. It's just kind of fun to read them, honestly. They're kind of dorky, and they're kind of, they're just fun to read. So, That's all I got for today. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And remember to always face your fears.